the disciplines too are profoundly contradictory. They not only produce racial power and inhibit racial knowledge, but they also provide discursive tools that enable and enhance the telling of race and the reimagination of racial justice. The division of research into disciplinary specialties took place under historically specific conditions, and excavating that history is a critical first step towards racial justice. They were founded on the premise that productive research happens through separate and seemingly discrete aspects of our shared social existence, a practice that undoubtedly has been incredibly fruitful in terms of ideas and evidence and arguments. However, disciplinary knowledge is also part of a historically specific body of knowledge that contains premises, presumptions, and practices that work together to hide the workings of racialized power. As a result, the histories of the disciplines are suffused with unacknowledged and uninterrogated premises and practices that have legitimized and reinforced racial inequities. Critical race theory empowers us to adopt the necessary racialized epistemological position to both excavate these histories and dismantle the technologies, like colorblindness, that have been developed to mask and preserve them as racial projects. One of the ways, as I've said, that disciplines and universities produce racial power and inhibit racial knowledge is the ideology and practice of colorblindness. In fact, most institutions in America today are formally organized around the untested assumption that colorblindness is the exclusive measure of a fair and just organizational practice. Colorblindness teaches that there is a greater similarity between us all that should trump difference, and beneath our surface differences lies a shared human condition. Colorblindness offers as a solution to difference in the form of simply no longer acknowledging difference. The "I don't see color" and the "all lives matter" rhetoric are probably the most obvious examples that we run into. It is unfortunate then that colorblindness has become the default position for social justice, as it functions as a color-conscious tool to protect white privilege. If there is no difference to Black or brown or white experiences and realities, then there is no white privilege or inequality to dismantle, therefore ensuring white superiority. It, of course, does not do away with color, but instead reinforces whiteness as the norm against which difference is measured. Furthermore, it is especially telling that a metaphor for visual impairment is used as a call to embrace a simplistic form of racial justice. And it's doubly problematic as it supposes that visually impaired people cannot perceive racial difference, which has been proven to be untrue. Disciplines in their current instantiation operate behind this facade of colorblindness, characterizing themselves as egalitarian and meritocratic. Behind this facade lies the historical reality that knowledge production has played a role in theorizing and fortifying racial projects like slavery, colonialism, eugenics, and genocide. Classics' role in legitimizing and fortifying these projects, both historical and contemporary, is sizable. One could throw a dart at a historical timeline, and there would be an excellent chance that you would find a place where the cultural capital of Greco-Roman antiquity contributed to the subordination and domination of a group of peoples. Whether it's the German classicists participating in Hitler's ancestral heritage program, or foundational American classicist Basil Gildersleeve's entrenched defenses of slavery, or Jesuit colonists reading Caesar as a guide to dealing with indigenous peoples, or the Trump administration's desire to, quote, make federal buildings great again by requiring classical architecture, it's clear that classics has contributed and still contributes substantively to much larger racial projects. Classics is not alone in needing to recognize and address its racialized past and present, though. Every established discipline in the academy has an origin that entails engagement and complicity with white supremacy. The humanities have systematically ignored their racialized histories and structures by methodologically theorizing difference largely on the axes of margins and centers rather than the axes of domination and oppression. Scholars of political science, philosophy, history, and economics turned to biology and the survival of the fittest to explain European world dominance. Instead of investigating the brutalities of conquest and the systems of exploitation that conquest relies on, biological difference imbued race with scientific inevitability, which positioned whites as clear winners. The age of colonization and indigenous dispossession and the violent encounters between Europeans and indigenous peoples soon after sparked anthropology's interest in, quote, primitive cultures. While these modes of inquiry may seem outdated or relics of the past, disciplines simply replace these racist forms of knowledge production with colorblindness and a refusal to engage racialized histories, structures, identities, and contexts. Our institutional and disciplinary allegiance to colorblindness in the admissions, assessment, and advancement processes is directly responsible for 80% of doctoral students in classics being white in any given year. Refusing to see race has fundamentally reinforced the historical processes that have maintained the subordination of non-white peoples. It seems, though, in their inception and initial developments, most disciplines had no problem seeing race or color as the logic of racial hierarchy, provided the very structures they were built on, provided the very structures they were built upon. Concepts like survival of the fittest migrated from discipline to discipline in support of whiteness and racial subordination. Critical race theory calls for a different migration, a migration of racial consciousness